What is up, everybody, and welcome to the All-NBA Show, part of the All-City Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Mares, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Tim Legler. Legs, two great games to wrap up the Western Conference semifinals over the weekend, and the Western Conference finals are set. How'd you enjoy the weekend?
I loved it, man. I loved it. A lot of drama. I mean, I thought there was maybe an opportunity we were going to get 3 Game 7s, but 2 was still pretty good. You get 2 of those on the same day, and you know what was nice too about it? There was like a gap in between the games. So like you could decompress from the first game and like get some food and relax for a minute and then get ready for the night game. But listen, I don't lose sleep over the results of these games. So I know there's some fan bases that probably feel a lot differently than that. It was a great weekend, but for me and as an analyst, it was a phenomenal weekend, a lot to dive into, a lot to look at, and some big time performances.
You could have said I didn't lose sleep, unlike my co-host here, who definitely lost some sleep last night.
I know. I thought it's easier to let the griever bring up his own grief than to actually, be the one to mention it. So,
right before we went live, Legs told me he didn't text me last night out of sympathy, just giving me space, which is like almost insulting that you're like, you know what, he needs to grieve. I'll give him his space. But you know what? It happens. The Nuggets blow a 20-point second half lead. We're going to break down that game in detail and talk about the takeaways. What does it mean for Minnesota? What does it mean for Denver? And then we're going to move on to the other series, of course, Dallas and the Thunder. Same thing. Big takeaways on each side for that one. And then, of course, we'll send the back half of the show previewing the Western Conference Finals, which is now set. The Timberwolves and the Mavs should be a great matchup. We're presented, as always, by DraftKings. Stay tuned because you'll hear more about DraftKings and all it has to offer throughout the show. DraftKings, the crown is yours. All right, let's go to it. It was last night. The Nuggets, led by 15 at the half, played some phenomenal defense in that first and second quarter. Probably the best defense I've seen from the Nuggets all season. It obviously came at a price. Denver was very fatigued in that second half, and the Minnesota Timberwolves held strong. Fell behind by 20 in the first couple minutes of the third quarter, but stormed all the way back, had a 28-14 rally in the third quarter to pull within 1. And in the fourth quarter, some big shots from big players, including a fall away from Rudy Gobert. Very impressive bend but never break series for the Wolves, bend but never break game from the Wolves. And I was very impressed. What stood out to you the most about this specific game?
All right, I guess if you're going to ask me the most, right, the first thing that I would point to is how impressed I am with the fact that Minnesota stayed mentally in the fight.
Yep.
Okay, you're talking about a Game 7 against the defending champs in their building, down 20 in the second half. And to your point, I thought Denver's game plan defensively, and I texted you about this toward the end of the first half, was perfect against Minnesota. And it was the execution of it too. Like the double teams weren't random and indiscriminate and run out at Anthony Edwards when he crosses half court the way that, the Pacers tried that against Brunson. And then the Knicks got like 3 great shots out of that. It's too easy for great players to pick you apart like that. And Ant wasn't running a lot of ball screens where that was an obvious trapping situation. It was more like later when he'd get the ball and he'd sort of go to a wing and he's getting ready to get into, attack mode. Then they'd run somebody at him. By that time, you were deeper into the clock. The spacing wasn't great to attack it. And I thought they actually executed it to perfection. Now, along with that, Adam, in the first half, you got to have shot making also. Like to Denver, okay, it's one thing to execute a defensive game plan. Are they going to have anybody get hot for them early? And obviously Jamal Murray was sensational in the first half of the game. Add it all up, you got this big lead. You come out for the second half, you get that thing to 20. And I was so impressed with the fact that Minnesota, like they looked like they were still in a state of readiness. Like they at no point did they let go of the rope. Because if they let go of the rope at all, that ends up being a 25, 30-point game. And that's it. And you're basically not a single important possession over the last probably 15 minutes of the game. If they let go of the rope in the first 9 minutes, they never did. They just kept coming. What I was thinking at the time is if they could just make a couple shots first, because normally we talk about their defense being, that's what everybody's going to be talking about today. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. The numbers and what they did to Denver in this series, incredibly impressive. But to me, what came first yesterday was shot making. Like at some point, you've got to start scoring to think that you have a chance in the game. And that's what happened. They started making some shots in the third quarter. And you look up and you're going, okay, all right, it's 14. There's a lot of time left. And with our defense, which is capable of stringing together stops at a really high level, which is required in a comeback, now you're like, okay, you know what? We're in this game. And the fact that they stayed there in that state of mind all throughout that big deficit, the crowd, Murray playing great, Jokic playing great, and like everything basically stacked against them, easy for a young team to say, you know what, just wasn't our year. We came close and we're going to be ready next year. They never got into that place of submission. And Denver hit them with everything they could to get them to submit, Adam, and they never did. And that to me is the biggest takeaway of all of this, to have the mental wherewithal and then also be able to execute it to get back in the game on both ends. Incredibly impressed with Minnesota. I know you probably have a little bit of a different perspective in terms of fault with the Nuggets, and we can get into some of that. But I want to start, I think, with the positive, which is the Timberwolves deserve a lot of credit for staying mentally with it in this game and for what they were able to do to Denver in this series defensively, particularly in their building.
I absolutely agree with you. I will even phrase this. Denver did collapse in this game, and Denver did, lose the series. But I think the Wolves took the series more so than Denver lost it. Both things are true, but I give more credit to the Timberwolves for all the things you're saying. And when you say let go of the rope, that tends to mean, give up. But I would say even more impressive than that was they didn't get sped up. When you get down 20, there's a sense of we got to go. We got to start making shots. Yeah. We got to start taking, stepping outside the lines. And that's what was impressive is they never stood outside the lines. They just trusted the game plan, just kept sticking with it. And nobody went into hero mode. People made hero plays, but it was all within the confines of what they were trying to do strategically in this one. And that's what was so impressive. I will go to Denver's side here, though. 47 minutes for Jokic. He rested 1 minute. That came in the first half. 43 for Jamal Murray, 42 for Aaron Gordon. The Nuggets clearly did not trust their bench in this one. And after game 6, when the Wolves shortened their rotation, I think Denver worried, can our bench go up against their starters, their best lineup? And the answer was clearly no. But in this one, when you built a 15-point lead, when you had a 10-point, 15-point lead, I thought there were moments for Michael Malone to steal some rest for Jokic and for Murray. And I think he was feeling this step on their throats here. Let's push it. And I understand why he did that. But in hindsight, I think that second half had a lot to do with the Nuggets not having anything in the tank. I mean, Jokic took 10 3-pointers in this game. He needed to take and make threes. But in that third quarter, when the lead was slipping, you needed to get a possession on offense that settled things down. And Denver kept going to threes. And part of that was the Wolves were trusting that if they pack the paint, you up the variance for Denver. But part of that was, and I'm so curious what you think. I was a little disappointed in Jokic in that quarter because of how much he kept going to the pick and pop. And it just felt like he needed to go towards the basket there. And I just think he didn't have it in the tank to do it. Did you feel that way about Jokic specifically in the third quarter?
I got to be honest. And so when I get asked a question like that, I'm going to go back to like in the moment. What I was feeling, thinking, note-taking, I was not saying that to myself. I'm going to be honest with you. I was not saying that to myself. One of the things that stood out to me in this game, and it's obvious if you just look at the lack of production they got at everybody else. I mean, Murray was great in the first half, quieter second half, but that's to be expected. He still ended up overall. The dude showed up in a big way in this game. So did Jokic. They had 8 made field goals total from anybody not named Murray or Jokic. 8.
Yeah.
When you look at Minnesota, Anthony Edwards had a terrible shooting game. 6 for 24 from the field. Karl Anthony Towns had a very good game, 8 for 14. But beyond those two players, who are their two best offensive players, clearly, they had 17 made shots. amongst the rest of their roster. 17 outside of the stars. Denver had 8. I mean, you can't get quieter than Aaron Gordon was. Michael Porter Jr., who had, I thought, some good looks that he could have knocked down that would have made an enormous difference. KCP was 2 for 7. That's a bonus when he scores, so I'm not going to beat him up. You got 5 points off the bench. Christian Brown didn't have the impact he normally does, and you got nothing out of Justin Holiday and Reggie Jackson in limited minutes, 14 minutes. So for me, it felt like Jokic and Murray, it felt like the weight of all of this definitely caught up to them in the second half of this game. And to your point about running out of gas, I did a touchscreen this morning on Get Up showing the difference. Like this game plan with Anthony Edwards and running guys out at him and the perimeter beyond a 3-point line and when they did it and the difference between their rotations in the first half and their rotations in the second. And I used 2 plays. One was a Denver play where they trapped Ant on the right wing in the first half, like 10, 12 seconds on the shot clock. They ran at him and he kicked it out and then it got to the weak side of the floor and Jamal Murray left the last trap and sprinted, dead sprint from the right wing to the left corner and basically got there when Jane McDaniels caught the ball and put it in the cradle and he was in his lap. He covered 40 feet. Yeah. Right. Okay. And he ended up with a contested 3. Now, the other play I showed, and this is what my point was about, they had to start making some shots to believe, and they got loose. And it was very similar setup. Anthony Edwards, second half, 9-point game. Anthony Edwards, right wing, late in the clock. This is the second time he had touched the ball in this possession. Goes to the right wing, drags 2 defenders with him along the sideline. He picks it up. He kicks it to the top of the key, and then they get it to the weak side to Mike Conley Jr., who banged a 3 to cut it to 6. And I froze it because it was KCP and Aaron Gordon were the 2 guys that trapped Anthony Edwards. Well, one of those 2 players has to sprint out of that trap to get to the opposite side of the floor. Not only did they not sprint out of it, they never moved. The shot was taken. Both of those guys were with arm reach still of Anthony Edwards. And Adam, he had passed it to one player who then passed it to Conley. Like, think how long that takes to get to the opposite side of the floor. And the 2 defenders that trapped him never took one step toward the weak side of the floor. And Mike Conley ends up with a naked 3 right in front of the Wolves bench that cut it to 6. And this was during that stretch when they were getting back in it and feeling it. And it just showed to me a contrast in the difference of execution of a game plan and the amount of effort, concentration, and attention to detail it takes to pull it off for 48 minutes. I didn't think Denver did nearly as good a job of that in the second half. And once Minnesota started making shots, they were younger, fresher, more athletic. And then their defense is what they hang their hat on. They knew they could be disruptive with a more tired Denver offense if they could just get within striking range, and that's what the shot making allowed it to do. And so I thought it was a pretty good contrast in first half execution defensively versus second half.
And those types of plays you're talking about, it's funny because they have the effect of a haymaker, a 3, but they come from the patience of knowing you don't need a haymaker. Let's just trust our process here. Yeah. Let's work on the details. Let's drag the defense. And all of a sudden you're getting multiple 3s in a row. That the run where they really closed the gap, it was a bunch of 3s, but it was 3s off of good process. It wasn't guys forcing stuff. I want to go back to Denver real quick, just to kind of put a bow on it. People have been asking me, are you shocked? Or are you this or that? I'm not shocked. In fact, I picked Nuggets in 7 in the series, but when you pick a team in 7, you're kind of saying it's going to come down to the end. It's going to come down to home court advantage. I thought this series would go the way it went and that Denver would hold on at home. So the fact that they didn't, it's a narrow margin. But the reason I thought the margins were so thin in part was Denver has not looked good for the last month and a half. Murray goes down. If people remember, Denver had the 1 seed locked up. All they had to do was beat the tanking Spurs, and they blew a 20-point lead in that game. They had a 20-point lead late, and they blew it. And you think, this is the most clutch team in the NBA, and they just melted down in the clutch against the team with the worst record in the West. And they did it looking very fatigued and it's Jamal Murray in particular, just looking a little out of sorts. And I remember taking note at that time going, Murray was out for an extended period. He comes back. The team looks tired and he doesn't look right. Let's note that. Then you go into the Lakers series and it's the same thing. They don't look good in that series the whole time. They eke out these wins. There's some heroics, but Murray doesn't look good and the team looks tired. So for me, and this is not an excuse, this is a story of the Nuggets season. For whatever reason, they ran out of gas, in my opinion, late in this year. And you could see that there were key moments, the season on the line, where they just didn't have more in the tank to offer in those types of plays that you're talking about, where it required a second or third effort defensively, and they didn't have it. So part of me thinks that I'm not really surprised by the way the Nuggets' playoffs has gone. They could have won. It was this close. But at the end, they didn't have that extra hunger and that extra gear. And I think that, to me, is as much the story of the season as anything.
Yeah, and you've been saying that, and I could tell in our conversations the way the conversation sort of changed throughout the year. And to be fair, you and I first paired up at the beginning of this season. We weren't talking about the Nuggets during their championship run, right? You and I weren't doing a show together. This happened as they're trying to repeat, and so we know what they look like at their best. And there was times this season when they reached that point, and I think you felt a lot better about them. As a guy that watches them every night, your perspective is so good, but you definitely had serious doubts over the last couple of months at different times. I can just hear it in your voice. And I'm sure you were probably pretty nervous, as most Nuggets fans were yesterday, because this series was weird. It was a weird series. You have 5 road wins,
man. Yeah.
5 road wins in a 7-game series. 5. I mean, and blowouts and like just these wild runs. The numbers on Minnesota, I got these from ESPN Research this morning, are pretty impressive. So prior to this series, in the last 2 years in the playoffs, Denver 13-1 at home, averaged 111 points a game in that building. This series, 1-3, averaged 95 points a game. So
95.
you're talking about 16 points less per game than they did in every other playoff game in the last 2 years prior to this series, and 1 loss total in that building in the postseason, in the last 2 postseasons before this series, and they lose 3 times in 1 series at home.
Yeah.
So it's impressive, man. And I think, by the way, I've been noticing, and this has been a recent memory here, I'd say go back 10, 15 years, when a game 7 would come up. It was almost like you had to be out of your mind to pick the road team to win a game 7, because history said it was like 95% of the time home teams win game 7s. That's changing over the last several years. It's changing. It's more likely than it's ever been that road teams can win. I don't know what the reason for that is. I really don't. I don't know. I can't point to why that is. Do you think teams feel more pressure than ever, because of the way that these series are covered and everything else? There's more spotlight on failure and the pressure of failing and not coming. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, but it's definitely more likely than it's ever been. We're seeing teams now pull this off. So you don't think it's out of the question to see a team win a road game 7. I didn't know what was going to happen last night. I was pretty confident in the Nuggets. And of course they got up 20. I thought it was a done deal. I'm not gonna lie to you. I thought the game was over. I thought it was over.
Yeah.
And I think that explains a little bit of Michael Malone's reaction last night, at his press conference when he's asked about, he's still in that, he's seething because he really probably couldn't even believe what he just watched. You get a 20-point lead at home in a game 7 against a young team trying to figure this all out, the first time in the spotlight together. And so I was shocked by the way it played out. I wouldn't have been shocked if that was close the whole way and Minnesota won the game. I wouldn't have been shocked, but I was shocked that they were down 20 points in the second half and they win this game. I mean, I think that's fair to say.
The 2 shots that I think made the biggest impact in this one, Mike Conley hit a contested 3 at the end of a shot clock. Denver played phenomenal defense. This is late. I think it's like a 2-point Wolves lead late in the 4th. You think, okay, it's clutch time. Who can get some stops? Denver, I thought, did everything they could to get a stop. Mike Conley kind of takes a sidestepping prayer 3 and nails it. And I believe it was the next possession or possession after when Gobert, same situation, light shot clock, takes a fall-away jumper, turnaround fall-away jumper and nails it. Those 2 shots, big-time shot making that just I felt sunk Denver. Whatever hope they had of eking this one out in the clutch evaporated with those 2 shots. So tip your hat to them. But let's move to the Timberwolves side now, because you mentioned Denver last year and how I felt about them. Every year there's a team that has the magic. I'll call it the magic, where when you see it, you know what you're seeing. A team that is just coming together in terms of belief and intangibles and all that stuff, as well as their identity and their talent is all coming together. And for me, the Timberwolves have had that all playoffs. And last night was the best example of that, because part of having the magic is it's not just one guy is carrying you, in this case, Anthony Edwards. Karl Anthony Towns had a career game last night, and the numbers are good, not great, 23 points, 12 rebounds. but he was phenomenal. Denver made a strategic decision in this game. Double Anthony Edwards. To your point, they were smart about the timing and the recovery of those doubles, but don't double Karl-Anthony Towns. Let's see what happens and see if he can beat you. And Minnesota did a great job of getting Jamal Murray switched on him over and over again, getting smaller guys switched onto him. And he stepped up by playing near perfect basketball in that moment. And this is part of the magic. What does a team need? What is a team doing to us? And how do we beat it? Trust that this is the way to beat it. And Karl-Anthony Towns stepped up to that challenge. And then defensively, he guarded Jokic phenomenally all series, but in particular in this game. So for me, this is part of it. Karl-Anthony Towns was not the guy I thought was going to be the MVP of a Game 7, but I thought he was.
I agree with you. He was sensational. Look, if you look at Minnesota's overall box score, right, and if you're Michael Malone and someone had given you this box score before the game, said this is what Minnesota's shooting splits are going to look like: 39 from the field, 29 from the three. Basically, the turnover game and points off turnovers is going to be a wash, because that's always a big factor, because you could hold a team down in shooting, but then you give the ball up 18, 20 times, you're going to give them enough opportunities. That wasn't really a factor. Basically a wash. The rebounding battle, basically a wash. You didn't get crushed on the glass. Minnesota had 11 offensive rebounds. Denver had 11 offensive rebounds. So if you gave all of that to Michael Malone, he would have been fixated on these shooting splits and said, there's no way that they're going to get to the number they're going to need to against us, because we're going to shoot better than that. So there's no way they can beat us if that's the case. But Karl-Anthony Towns, Jaden McDaniels, both of those guys, they were the two guys that had enough answers when they needed to have it that made all the difference in the world. I agree with you about Karl-Anthony Towns. He's so talented. And sometimes he's awkward. He's awkward. And even the way he plays, his theatrics on the court, his facial expressions, like some of the stuff he says, he comes off like a little kid in a lot of ways. And so he's got this mystique around him that you're not really sure you know what this guy's all about. But he is absolutely mega talented. And he's a load, man. He's 6'11". He is powerful, that he can post. He can take you off the drive and get his shoulder into you and finish that way. Or he could step out and he can knock down perimeter shots if that's what the situation recalls. He was fantastic. Those guys in a game in which Denver shot 41% overall, Minnesota shot 39% overall, those two players went 15 for 24 from the field. That is the difference in the game.
Yep.
Because without that shot making of those two guys, regardless of some of the moments you pointed to at the Conley three and the Gobert play, they were. In fact, I made a joke today. The Gobert one, the turnaround jumper, I felt like maybe all of the telecommunications companies in this country were going to shut down because there had to be 100 million people text game at the same time when that happened, because that's what it felt like. Like, are you kidding me? And then, of course, those guys had fun with that at the press conference after. But those moments, sure, they helped. They mattered. But at the end of the day, the consistency that McDaniels and Towns gave you throughout the game and just keeping you afloat until they could finish the deal with their defense, I thought that, you're right. I thought that was the difference, and I thought Towns was the MVP of this particular game.
It to me, this is part of having the magic is Karl-Anthony Towns, like the Nuggets were daring him to beat them last night, and he did, but he did it on 14 shots. And a lot of times when a team will overload or say, okay, we're not going to double this guy, but we're going to double over here, what have you, that guy ends up taking 25 shots. Maybe the rhythm gets disrupted. I thought Towns did a great job of, okay, they're giving me this, but how do I maximize the value of it? And he was just phenomenal. And then on the defensive side, it's not like he's guarding Jokic one-on-one. When he got the ball in the post, they would send the double from the high side, and they had Rudy Gobert patrolling the paint. In a lot of ways, it was like 2.5 on Jokic at all times in the post. But at the same time, that only works if you're a point of attack defender. Your main guy is able to sort of funnel him in the right directions and play the right defense. And he did it all series long, and in particular in this game. And as much as Jokic had a 34-point, 19 rebound, 7 assist game, it still contained him enough so that he couldn't single-handedly carry the Nuggets out of this mess. And that's why I'm just so impressed with Minnesota. Incredible discipline. I just thought they were great. Any final thoughts on what you've seen from Minnesota?
Look, they're a team that what they can present defensively and the number of guys that they have with that level of lateral quickness and length on the perimeter is just different than other teams. But I'll say this, as we prepare for this next series, The one difference between, I think, what Oklahoma City could throw at Luka with Lou Dort, who that dude, I don't know what that dude benches, but you're talking about a guy that can just absolutely stand his ground with physical strength. That's really important against Luka. The guys he's going to get in this series, as long as they are, as quick as they are, as athletic as they are, it's not the same physical profile as Lou Dort, and you need it against Luka. So I think, as they're a great defensive team, they got great perimeter defenders. I actually think this is going to be a little bit of relief for Luka Doncic going forward into this next series, Adam, because he doesn't have to deal with that wrestling match, with that physical strength coming at him to the extent that he did in the Oklahoma City series. So I'm really curious to see, as great as this Minnesota team has been defensively all year, and they've turned it up in really big spotlight moments in the postseason. Now it's a totally unique and different challenge that they have in taking on the Dallas Mavericks backcourt. It's going to be fascinating.
Well, let's take a break and let's get to that one on the other side. We'll quickly wrap up the Dallas Thunder series and just talk big takeaways there before moving to the preview now of what is the Western Conference Finals. Should be a great one. Timberwolves, Mavs feels like the right teams in the after we've seen how it played out in the playoffs, feels like the right two teams. So we'll get to all of that and more on the other side. First, I want to tell you guys about AG1. Not only does AG1 deliver your daily dose of vitamins, minerals, pre and probiotics, and so much more, but it's a powerfully healthy habit that's also powerfully simple. It's just one scoop mixed in water once a day, every day. Pool and beach season is only like 2 weeks away. You want to start making some healthy choices in your life to get ready for that season. We'll start with AG1, which of course gets you set up with to feel healthy and also just gets your day started on a healthy note. Right now, AG1 is the supplement I trust to provide the support my body needs daily, and that's why I'm excited to welcome them as our partner. And if you want to take ownership of your health here as we get ready for summer and pool season, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase exclusively at drinkag1.com/allNBA. That's drinkag1.com/allNBA. Check them out. Also want to tell you guys about DraftKings Sportsbook. They're the presenting sponsor here. We're this close to crowning the NBA champion. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about the odds for the 4 teams and previewing this Western Conference Finals. Who has the upper hand there? Who does DraftKings think is going to win? And right now, the action is heating up on the court. It's even hotter on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500. Just deposit at least $5 and you'll get a bonus bet back equal to your first bet if it doesn't hit. So you bet $20, you get that $20 back. You bet $100, you get that $100 back. You bet $1,500, you get that $1,500 back. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code ALLNBA. That's code ALLNBA for new customers to get the no sweat bet up to $1,500 if your first bet doesn't hit. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or in West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. One no-sweat bet per new customer. Issued as one bonus bet based on amount of initial losing bet. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.co/bball for eligibility, wagering, and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources.
All right, back here, segment 2 of the All-NBA show. The Wolves weren't the only impressive comeback in a must-win game. The Mavericks did the exact same thing to the Thunder on Saturday. After trailing by double digits at halftime, they stormed back and win the second half, including the fourth quarter, where they had some incredible shot making in the clutch and survived what I thought was an A-plus game from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. 36 points, 14 of 25 shooting, 8 assists. He was almost perfect in the clutch of this game, so the Mavs had to match that, and they were up for it. Big-time shot making from Kyrie and others. What stood out to you about that game?
First of all, let me ask you a question. Was this the most entertaining game of the postseason? Because it might have been for me. It might have been for me, man.
Well, I honestly don't feel like in the Nuggets game, the Nuggets lost it and the Wolves won it. In this one, I thought no team lost it. The Mavs just happened to have won it. Both teams played great.
I agree. It was a lot like, and I'm a huge golf fan. I had one eye in the PGA Championship, and I was kind of glad. It's kind of like that. No one gagged it up, right? Nobody hit it in the water on 16. Like guys were making shots all the way through it, and you want somebody to make a big putt to win it, and that's what happened in that. I felt the same way about this. It was one haymaker after another, like just big time shot making, big answers, big responses, and then, a very tough call that went against Oklahoma City. But I completely agree with the call, and the reason I thought the explanation on the air was a good one, because we've seen a lot of plays, Adam, where guys get a piece of the ball first, and then the follow through continues into the body or the arm. And it's like the rule, they always say, oh, yeah, he got the ball first, dislodged it. And then after that, whatever happens. The follow through, you can have all the contact you want, apparently.
Yeah.
In this situation, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander hit the ball first. The PJ Washington is about to release that ball. The problem for him was the ball never really moved. It stayed in both hands after his hand had touched the ball and come off the ball, which means, okay, now I'm about to shoot it. You've already touched it, but now you're off the ball. I still have control of the ball. Now I'm going to shoot it. And then the contact takes place with his arm. I thought the call was the right call. 2.1 seconds left. This is it. If he just runs by him, maybe PJ Washington makes an incredible shot. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he misses that and it's over. And we go to a game 7 instead. It was PJ Washington getting fouled in that play, going forward, and smart strategy, makes a couple and then misses on purpose, knowing that Oklahoma City couldn't advance the ball and they have a desperation heave, and Dallas goes on. But I thought the second half and the fourth quarter in particular was just a series of big moments offensively for both teams, with a lot of different people answering the call, man. And it was so entertaining and thrilling down the stretch, and ultimately Dallas, very fortunate and grateful to survive. I picked them to win the series. Everybody knows that. I said they were going to go to the conference finals, and here they are. But it was very difficult and hard work to get there. And I thought Oklahoma City, Shai was incredible. Chet Holmgren played great. Jalen Williams was good enough. Ultimately, you take away Shai's 3-point shooting, and they were 11 for 36 from the three. And I think that did affect them. They had some good looks that didn't go down that I think would have made a big difference in this game.
Let's go back to that foul. Part of me wonder, you got PJ Washington shooting a contested three. I know this is easy for me to say. The contest is good enough. The trying to make the block, it's almost like you got to, if you're going for that play, you have to make it clean, 100% clean or what have you. And he almost did. But part of me goes, in that moment, I just thought that's a perfect outcome for Oklahoma City. There's enough time, if they make that shot, you live with it. But you just give it to him. And when you go for the hero play there, you get him on the arm, he's going to make free throws. I thought the shot that they gave up to me was like a 32% shot, PJ Washington making that one from the corner. So I know that's easy for me to say it's a bang, bang play, but that's how I felt about that one. What was the most impressive thing you saw from Dallas in the series? Because here's my opinion on Dallas. I don't think they've played their best basketball yet in this playoffs. And I don't know if that's a good thing, or I don't know if that's a bad thing now that we're 2 rounds into it and they've played good enough to get there. That's very impressive. But I think we've seen Minnesota have a great game, several great games. I don't know if we've seen the Mavericks consistently have great games. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I've been feeling that way the whole time. And it's why, if you're a Mavs fan or you're someone that's, kind of looking at them at their best, as I have been here for a couple of months, and thinking they can make a deep run, you're getting nervous about it every game, because I don't feel like they've hit that stride. I don't. Right. They've had moments where they did it. They've had stretches in games, but for the most part, they have been inconsistent with their offense relative to their top level. And we just haven't seen much of it. And I think a lot of it for me has to do with Luka Doncic's just health. He's had a more difficult time playing faster sometimes when he wants to. He's never a guy that's going to play super fast, but he plays quicker and more decisively at times when he's at his best. He's had a harder time because of his health doing that. And I think the separation for him has been a little bit harder. He still has been in control of these games, and he's just such a great player. I don't think that was his best even in this game. His stat line's incredible, and I still feel like there's more there for Luka. So maybe, like you said, is that a good thing because that's still to come and they're going to need it against Minnesota and possibly beyond? Or are you concerned that maybe they're not going to hit that level in this playoff run, and at some point they're going to run into a team that they're going to need that against? So I agree with you. I don't think they've hit their peak level, but here's to answer your question. What has stood out the most to me about the Dallas Mavericks? This is a championship caliber defense. They've got speed. They've got athletes. They've got great length. and activity in the middle. And then they've got guys like Kyrie and Luka who have bought in. It's the hardest I've ever seen Kyrie Irving play defense. It's the hardest in Luka Doncic's, short career that I've seen him play defensively. And even if they're not locking guys up, in a perimeter, that's not their nature. Their rotations, their where they are in terms of the team defensive concepts have been really good. Luka trying to take charges. Kyrie doing some of the stuff I talked about Minnesota doing, or Denver, where you trap on one side and sprint to the opposite side of the floor on a closeout. Like Kyrie is doing that stuff for the first time in his career, really, have I seen him do it. So they're championship caliber, man, their defensive effort. And I thought Derek Lively was absolutely incredible on Saturday night. His offensive rebounding in the fourth quarter of that game, they don't win the game without it. So that, to me, I think Adam has made them just so much more relevant as a legitimate contender. Can you actually go toe-to-toe with teams and guard them if you have to do it? If you're going through a period where you're not making shots, can you hold a team down for 4 or 5 minutes until you start making shots? I didn't think about them at the beginning of the season. I certainly didn't think about them last year. I do now. I have faith that they can string together stops to close a deficit, that they can string together stops to put a game away, if that's what it takes. And I never felt that way about the Mavericks since Luka got there until now.
The thing for Dallas that I think has impressed me here, and like I said, I don't think they've played a great series yet, although they do seem to be trending in the right direction to where now I kind of expect them to be. I think this conference finals will be their best. They're going up against their best opponent, but I also think it'll be their best performance based on the way they've been trending. But the thing that impresses me about them is they're pretty versatile at doing what they do best. And what I mean is you're obviously going to be Luka Doncic's team, Kyrie flanking him, but you have so many different pieces. And we talked about this earlier in the year. Derek Jones was phenomenal in this game, and he goes 4 of 6. He's so athletic, and he provides a level of athleticism to the defense that makes them special. PJ Washington has that athleticism. Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, athletic, but in different ways. So they have all these different pieces to kind of mold and fit to what they want. And I thought, Jason Kidd, I thought had a great series, but part of what makes a great series for a coach is having options. He has a lot of options at his disposal for what his team can kind of present. And that to me is something that I think is even different from Minnesota, who has a great team, but they have guys that sort of replace guys at the same thing. Dallas, to me, gives different looks, and that's part of why I think they've been so successful so far, despite not making shots at the rate that we kind of expect them to make shots.
I agree with that. And I think one thing I'm looking for in this series, I don't think whatever Kyrie's approach has been here offensively, which seems to be very patient, right? Unusually patient for a electrifying scorer like Kyrie Irving. Because I'm looking at his numbers for his career, Adam. Every season of his career, the lowest number of field goal attempts he has averaged in his career in a season was his rookie year when he averaged 14.6 field goal attempts. Okay, that's the first year of his career. This year, he averaged almost 20 shots a game for the Dallas Mavericks. Only twice in this series did he take more than 14 shots in a 6-game series. Wow. And in the first half especially, he's been really quiet. And it's like, it's not like, oh man, he is aggressively trying to go and they're just bottling him up with all these traps and length and he just can't, he can't find a way to get shots off. It's almost by design that he has done this. And look, first of all, I laud the fact that he's playing that hard defensively, despite the fact that he's going periods of time without getting shots, because that takes a lot, man. For a scorer to continue to buy in defensively with that kind of effort tells you they're more interested in winning at this stage of their career than anything else. And that's how I feel about Kyrie Irving. That he just wants to win now. I'll say this though, I don't think they beat Minnesota if that's Kyrie Irving's approach. I think Kyrie Irving has to come out and be more aggressive from the beginning of these games in looking for his own offense. I think it's harder to turn that on later against a defense like this. Get in rhythm early. I think it's important for them. I also think, Anthony Edwards said his name. Did you hear him say his name in the post-game interview? On the court. I'm sorry, not on the court. He had put the headset on. He was talking back with Turner, with the studio, with Chuck and Kenny and those guys, Ernie. He said Kyrie Irving's name. He said, well, I know I got Kyrie Irving in the next round. He basically said, I'm guarding him.
Yeah,
and that was interesting to me. That was really interesting. You never hear stuff like that. And everybody's kind of, wow. And I didn't take it as much as like throwing down the gauntlet. Like, oh, what you got,
come on.
Kyrie? No, he was just basically saying, like, I got my hands full. I'm going to be guarding Kyrie Irving the next round. But number one, it lets you into the insight. They've clearly talked about this, obviously internally, right? And it's like an interesting thing. Does that get Kyrie Irving's attention a little bit? Like, hey, okay, well, here we go, young fella. Let me show you some things, because I think he needs to be more aggressive earlier in games in this next round to take some of that early game pressure off Luka, so he's not getting worn down as much. I think Kyrie needs to have a 10-point first quarter. Like, that's what I like to see out of him, more than pick his spots and turn it on later. I just think in this series more than any, that's going to be really important.
The floater zone is so deadly against Minnesota just because they want to provide that rim protection, and they have such long defenders to kind of recover off of screen. So oftentimes you're in that floater range, and Kyrie, one of the best, at that skill. So he can get to those spots and he can score from those spots. And I agree, when you hit that shot consistently, it bends the defense. So I think it'll be huge. But let's go through this matchup now and let's preview the Western Conference Finals in depth. This segment brought to you by DraftKings Sportsbook. Remember, use that code ALLNBA whenever you sign up. So if we get into some of the details here, first, the Timberwolves are favored in the series, -170 on DraftKings, Mavs +145, but that's pretty close. That's a pretty close line, saying that this one is a little bit of a coin flip, favors the Timberwolves a little bit. The length and athleticism and defense, to me, is going to be interesting here. But to your point, Luka is big. I would guess maybe even Anthony Edwards has to give him some minutes just because he has the strength, at least in the lower leverage. But Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, their fingerprints were all over that Denver series, forcing Murray into several bad games in that one. You're right that Luka is just such a different beast that defense, will it have zero impact? Will it have half the impact that they had in the Denver series? When you say that matchup favors Luka, do you think it's something that, hey, they can still slow him down a little bit? Or is that one where it's like, you're going to have to come up with a new scheme for this series?
Look, I'm of the belief when it comes to Luka Doncic, I really believe this. I think Luka Doncic is only guarded by him not being 100% and his own decision-making with shots. And mentally, sometimes I think he gets a little bit, flustered, and we've seen a lot of it in this round. I don't necessarily think there is a defensive matchup that I look at and go, wow, that's going to give Luka fits. I just think he's too big, strong, physical. He's too good with his deep shot when he gets going. He gets it off whenever he wants. And then the final component is you want to overload to a certain extent. He's going to get the ball on a rope to the opposite side of the floor for open shots. I don't think there's a real answer for him, but I thought Dort has one of the main qualities you need, which is I can hold my ground and not have to back up when you're giving me that shoulder. Luka relies on you giving ground when he hits you with the shoulder, and he goes into that back down game. He wants to get you back on your heels so he can separate when he wants to and shoot that little lean back shot, whether it's mid-range or deep shot. And Dort was able to stay moving forward the whole time. That's not going to be the case with Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Anthony Edwards, who you're right is stronger. He's not as strong as Dort, and Luka is the master at drawing fouls. How much are you willing to risk Anthony Edwards getting involved in those situations where Luka goes to the little fake step back and then he leans into you because you get up on your toes? He's a master. He gets 2 or 3 of those a game. So I don't know that you want to burn up a lot of energy. First of all, it takes your legs playing Luka Doncic. It takes your legs because he's so heavy and so strong, and you get in foul trouble. That's why I think Anthony Edwards is going to spend less time on him as a star player than he did on Jamal Murray in the last round. It's a different type of matchup. But I think Luka's gonna cause some real problems for those two guys I mentioned. They're long, they're athletic, they're not strong enough to keep Luka from getting to his spot. So I think that's going to be something major to watch. And so now you look at, if he gets going, what's the answer with Minnesota as far as double teaming him, and where does the double come from? And do you run a bigger guy at him on the double team, and then the other guy sort of protecting the rim? He is a nightmare to try to game plan for defensively because of his ability to beat you at the pass or the deep shot of the drive. It's just tough, and you can't really overwhelm him with pressure or with length or athleticism. He's just not susceptible to it, Adam, because of his overall strength with the ball. That's really what separates him from so many guys that are elite ball handlers in this league. So that's, to me, is the key and the core, and I can't wait to see what Minnesota's game plan is for this guy.
You brought up something that I think is actually really important in the series, which is foul drawing. Jamal Murray does not draw fouls. He does not draw shooting fouls, and he doesn't draw fouls. It's not even part of his game. He's not a guy that is crafty at that or focused on it in any way. KCP doesn't draw any fouls, obviously. So now you switch and you look at guys like Jaden McDaniels. Even in game 7, Jaden McDaniels had 2 or 3 fouls that you go like, what are you doing? Like he makes really bad fouls throughout the course of a game. Karl Anthony Towns, when he gets switched out, makes really bad fouls decisions. He sprinkles those in throughout the game. They're not the most disciplined in that one way. And Luka's as good of a foul drawer as anybody in the NBA. So to me, that is another one that I think becomes a storyline in this. Can the Wolves, and those 2 guys in particular, avoid fouls? Because the Wolves need those guys on the court to give their best punch. But the other part of that is the way the Dallas really draws fouls is they get big switched out onto Luka, onto the ball handler. The Wolves in the last series were the best I've ever seen at not getting screened. They didn't switch. They said, we're going to fight through every screen, and we have guys that can get skinny and get through it. Do you think Dallas will have a better luck forcing switches and forcing cross matches than what Denver had in this last round?
They definitely will. There's no question. And you got to remember too, if it's not Luka getting it done and that ball comes out, gets reversed to the other side, you've got another elite ball screen operator in Kyrie Irving that you're going to have to do some of those things. So I do think that they'll have more success with it in this series. There's another component to their offense I think is going to be a big factor in this series, and using Minnesota's length against them and their rim deterrence, and especially Gobert. Does anybody in this league deliver the late lob better than Luka Doncic?
Yeah.
Okay. And so watch how many times in this series, whether it's Towns or Gobert, but particularly Gobert, as Luka gets into that spot where he's kind of headed downhill and he's between the second and third hash on the lane, and it looks like he's going to shoot a floater, and he waits till the last second for Gobert to commit to him. And then he throws that lob just over his fingertips to Lively and Gafford. When you have a guy like Gobert that wants to challenge everything at the rim, you're very susceptible if you can have a guy that can deliver the basketball to athletes like this for the lob. It's going to be a big factor in this series, making Gobert pay for his commitment to Luka when Luka looks like he's going to go into scoring mode. It's a big factor. And, and Luka is the guy to deal with somebody like that. With the last second flip lob or the last second kick out opposite corner 3, once Gobert is committed to it. So I'm really looking to see what Gafford and Lively have as well against this big front line.
I got to give Gobert a shout though here. I think he's the best in the NBA at making that pass as hard as possible. So you're right that Luka is probably the best at the wait to the last second and read it. But Gobert got Jokic several times throughout this series at that cat and mouse game. Am I stepping up or am I going back? I think Jokic kind of figured out that late as the series went on that he was almost always covering the lob rather than the floater. But nonetheless, that will be a fun matchup that if Luka can take that away from Gobert, that's one of his strengths. If he can just read that perfectly, it'll be a big blow to the Wolves' defense. What about Anthony Edwards on the offensive end in the series? So last series, Denver just started to send in the trap. He was too good early on that Denver said, we're not going to let him beat us. We're going to try to trap. And we talked about how he is still has room to grow. Even in game 7, had room to grow into bending the defense and making them pay for those adjustments. Do you think the Mavericks are going to make the same decision? We got to double him. Or do you think that they're going to trust some of their athletic defensive players to guard him a little bit more one-on-one and have luck with it?
I definitely think, particularly because Dallas is going to be starting this series on the road, I think you try to see what your athletes can bring in getting more single coverage. Because I think, and I'm not saying it's a throwaway game or anything like that, but I'm just saying, if this was at home and you really want to come out, set the right tone and make sure this guy does not get going right off the bat, then maybe you think more about taking the ball out of his hands. I think in this case, you want to feel it out a little bit. I think Dallas goes into this thinking this is going to be a long fight. And let's not show everything right off the bat. Let's see how Derek Jones and PJ Washington, Josh Green, these are the main 3 guys that are going to get him. Luka will get him some, but that's a tough matchup for Luka from a foot speed standpoint. Those other 3 guys, that's who's going to be guarding Anthony Edwards. Let's see, particularly when you got really good rim protection behind you. And let's see what that looks like. Now, I talked about the lobs for Dallas's front line, equally susceptible with Gobert back there. He's going to get his share in this series as well. But I don't know that the guys delivering it are quite as adept at reading that situation as Luke is going to be to make Minnesota pay. But it's going to be a factor because Lively and Gafford definitely both want to go challenge everything as well. And that's going to leave you very susceptible to offensive rebounding and susceptible to tip-ins. And the offensive rebounding became a factor later in that game with Denver yesterday. Overall, I thought they did okay in the game, but they got hurt late with some big plays. Naz Reid, Cat, they had some big plays like Gobert. So let's see if these athletes can do a good job initially on Anthony Edwards to at least make him take difficult mid-range or deep contested shots and see what kind of success you have with that. That's what I would do if I were Jason Kidd. I'm not going full commit to an extra guy on Anthony Edwards right off the bat to start this series. Let's see. It's like a prize fight, man. Let's come out, let's trade some jabs, and let's see how I think we match up physically before I make those kind of decisions.
The other thing that'll be interesting here is the Wolves were designed to beat Denver in that playing two bigs really works when the power forward is not a floor spacer. You know, Aaron Gordon obviously wants to be in that dunker, being able to put Gobert on him, that works there. But that's not going to be the case in this round. They're able to spread you out and play 5 out or 4 out with one big, good roller. And now Gobert kind of, you know, he's great at playing that drop coverage, but can Dallas draw him out of that? That's one question I have. Is this going to be one of the series like we've seen in years past where Gobert is forced to guard on the perimeter, where he is underrated, but it's not what makes the Wolves so dynamic defensively, him being out there. What makes them dynamic is his ability to protect the paint. So is this a series where you think Dallas is going to be able to stretch that Timberwolves defense out and get Gobert out in space more often?
Absolutely do. I think this is going to be much more of a challenge for Gobert in this series. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, it's one thing. Jokic's passing is a big factor for them. Obviously, he's one of the best passers in the league, facilitators, but it's different when it's coming from a guy that's operating the way Jokic does and in the post a lot and stuff like that. When you have a guard that's handling the ball at the point of attack initially in your offense, that is this good at picking you apart with his passing, this is going to be a challenge for Gobert, who has to kind of hang back in the lane to give like another look for Luka to see who's behind the primary guy guarding him. And 7-3, that you get big, you put your arms up, you're back there, you're kind of hovering. The problem is those kickouts, man, to threes, that's going to be Gobert having to get out there on some of those. And that's going to be a lot of ground for him to cover because the ball gets there quickly with Luka. And it's a lot of guys that can knock down that shot. So I think for Gobert, this is going to be a bigger challenge than anything he's seen in terms of staying on the court and having that kind of impact defensively. This isn't two guys, a center in Jokic, who knows versatile all over the floor. He's still a center. And then Aaron Gordon is really relegated to operating along the baseline and around the rim. That played right into Gobert's strength. That's not going to be the case in the series, to your point. There's going to be 3 other guys on the court with Luka and one big, 3 other guys that can shoot threes. And that is going to be a more challenging rotation for not only Gobert, but also for Karl Anthony Towns.
What about turnovers? This is one way that the Mavs can be sunk. I mean, here's my thoughts on the Timberwolves. They're great defensively, especially in the half court, but their offense is susceptible to getting shut down because it's not that dynamic. They need to score in transition. I believe they are at the second most points off of turnovers. Yep, in the playoffs. They get 17.5 points a game off of turnovers. They rely on that transition and secondary break so much. Can Dallas not turn the ball over in this series, in your opinion? Because they've struggled with that.
Oh, they've struggled with big time. It's critical. And it's with Minnesota, right? That's when you feel them sort of taking your soul, because it typically not only are they forcing the turnovers, it's what they're converting at the other end and the spectacular way in which they're finishing those off. That's the stuff that like demoralizes you. It feels like more than 2 points after one of the turnovers against Minnesota with what they end up doing at the other end. Very, very important to take care of the basketball in this series. And it's very important for Luka to, you know, this is may sound ridiculous because I don't know if it's possible right now. Maintain your composure. Maintain composure if you're Luka Doncic. Like, you know, he had a lot going on with the officials in the last series. I think that is going to absolutely work against him, because this is a team defensively that loves that kind of stuff. They feast on you complaining to the officials. It energizes them to know they've gotten into your head. They're bothering you. Luka, every star player is going to complain to a certain extent. Nobody, I think, complains probably more than Luka. He was really bad in the last series. He needs to tone that down a little bit. I think it exudes a level of calm and confidence and poise against a great defensive team that you need against them to be able to operate and make your teammates feel like, we're cool, everything's good, rather than look like you're coming unraveled because of contact or hand checks that aren't called or whatever it may be. He needs to be better about it, I think, in this series than he was in the last one.
Let's get to this last part here. Now, I know Mavs fans have been upset with you because you were asked earlier on a show who you thought should be the title favorite, and you said the Timberwolves. Yeah. So does that mean that you believe the Timberwolves are winning the series?
Yeah, let me break this down for you, how this kind of went this morning on TV. So literally a producer in my ear in a break before we came back on TV said, who do you think should be the favorite to win the title now? That was the question was posed to me. And I said, well, Minnesota. We skipped over the conference finals, both conferences. We were already like in the finals now, basically. Who should win it if we got to that point? And I said, well, I think Minnesota, based on knocking off the defending champions in their building in a game 7, should now, I can see, and that defense looking the way that it does, I can see now why they should be the favorite. That's what I said. But I wasn't asked, do you think Dallas can beat Minnesota in the next round? If I had been asked that question, I would have said, yes, I do. I think Dallas can win that series. So that's kind of where my mind was when they asked who should be considered the favorite. I can get why Minnesota would be. And I don't know what it looks like in Vegas right now. Is Boston? I haven't looked. Is Boston considered the favorite as we sit here right now with 4 teams left?
I think so, just because they're such heavy favorites. They're minus 1,000 to beat the Pacers. We're going to talk about that series tomorrow. So they're such overwhelming favorites just to get to the finals. So I have to imagine they have the best odds.
Yeah. So I can see why people would think Minnesota should be based on what they just accomplished. But I think Dallas has the answer for their defense. I think they've got the answer. They've got the right star and they've got the right co-star. And more importantly, these are the 2 best defenses that I think I've seen in the postseason.
Yeah, I think you're right, honestly.
These 2 defenses are the 2 best defenses I've seen. So Dallas has an answer. If they are being locked up a little bit and shut down, they also can go, amount of time getting stops on the other end of the floor to keep them in games until they can figure out things offensively. So their defense is still, despite the fact that we've talked about a lot of metrics, I still think, Adam, it's one of the most underrated aspects of all of the playoffs is how good Dallas's defense is now that they've added certain guys. And just that gives them, to me, a greater championship look. It's championship caliber defense. Now the question is, can Luka and Kyrie have enough to figure out offensively how to beat a defense this good? But this is going to be an incredible matchup. And I think Dallas has the answer with Luka and Kyrie. I think that having 2 ball handlers on that level, 2 different guys that can escape, that can make shots, that to me is the difference between even what Denver presented with a guard and a big. It's just different when you've got 2 elite level ball handlers that can score from anywhere on the floor at any time.
I like this because we're rarely on opposite sides, and I think I'm going to be on Minnesota's side on this one. I just am so impressed with, I talk about the team having the magic, the belief. I feel like this last series was really important for Minnesota to be pushed to the brink, to blow a 2-0 lead and to have to win the last 2 games, to have to win on the road. There's something about a team having to do that and coming through the way that they did that it's so galvanizing. I am worried about the Gobert and space part of this. If a team can force him out there, it takes off a lot of what they do. But to me, I'm just so impressed with how together they played. I think Karl-Anthony Towns is going to be a real matchup problem offensively for the Mavericks, and I think that could tilt things. So I think this is a 6 or 7 game series, but I kind of favor Minnesota. It sounds like you kind of favor Dallas here. I think it's going to be a great series. Do you think is there a chance it's a short series, or do you feel like this is a lock to go 6 or 7?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any chance this is 5 or less. It's six minimum. And of those 6, I don't think you're going to see this series play out the way the Denver, Minnesota did with these wild swings and runs and blowouts. And I don't think you're going to see that. I don't think you're going to see, 5 road wins in a series. I think it's going to be a little bit more traditional series where these games are tight. Home court matters more, I think, in this next round. But I think this is going to be, and it could go either way. I could be dead wrong. I'm not going to be shocked if Minnesota wins, obviously. I'm not going to be shocked by that. They've got home court and they just beat Denver. Yeah, they got a really good chance to win this series, and a lot of people are going to pick them. I look at it in terms of what I've been seeing out of Dallas for a long time, and again, having the ultimate answer. Now, this is all going to be contingent, Adam, upon how Luka looks physically. How's he moving? And I think he's got a little bit more time off here. That's going to be good for him. Can he maintain that throughout the series? That's going to be a big part of this, and we're going to judge that game by game. How did Luka look physically? Because I think he has what it takes to beat a defense this good.
I know it's not the perfect metric, but if you just go off of game score, Luka had 2 of his 4 best playoff games in his last 2. And I think it matches my personal eye test, which is to say he looked injured, unfocused, frustrated, even a little out of shape for the early part of it. But as this series wound down, the last 2 games in particular, it looked like he got something back that he didn't have. So if he has that, if that trend continues and this is his best series, no question, I think the Mavs win. If he plays like he did in round 1 and some of the worst games of round 2, then I think it's Minnesota series. So a lot of this comes down to how much Luka can make them pay. All right, we have some super chats to get to, Emma, I'm told. Smooth Slide says, y'all can't be gone for too long. We've missed you and your hot takes dearly. It's true, Legs. We were off Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and they were huge days. We can never do that again.
No, I agree. We can't let that happen again. But first of all, I do have a question. Does the expression hot take have a negative connotation? I feel like it does. And I know I work at a place where there's a lot of hot takes thrown around every day, right? So I try not to give hot takes. I don't think I've ever said something with the intention of getting clicks or views. I just give my honest opinion. And I think you do the same thing. So I don't know if that was.
You called me soft as a pillow last show. You called me soft as a pillow, Legs. That was a hot take.
Well, I felt like it's funny because I actually was too soft in my response to your softness. I should have gone in much harder than that. Calling you a pillow that I could take a nap on, I think was actually, I let you off the hook. Next time you won't be so lucky.
Man, I'm going to be way harsher from here on out. Not letting anybody off the hook. What else we got? Jay Money says, Legs, it won't be overlooked that you have been proud owner of the Pacers and Mavs bandwagon since both of them made moves in the regular season. We see you.
I like that, man. I'm glad he included the Pacers in that statement because I was so high on them getting Pascal Siakam and what that move ultimately meant for them. So I've been high on them. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say I thought at any point Indiana Pacers in the conference finals, a lot of things had to transpire for that to happen. And look, a lot of it was injury related, but it's not taking away from their brand of basketball. And they force you to play it. And I thought all along they played more minutes in this series to their liking in terms of style than the Knicks were able to. And ultimately, that came to fruition in a Game 7 with that offense that was that difficult to guard and a ton of shot making. But look, injuries to Embiid, injuries to Giannis, to all the Knicks guys, it impacted the postseason. And so Indiana took advantage of this window that opened up and then played an almost perfect basketball game offensively yesterday. There's no other way to describe it. In fact, they set a record for field goal percentage in a playoff game in the history of this league. That's how good they were yesterday offensively.
On the road, no less. We're going to break that down tomorrow, of course. And then Carlos Hernandez says, as a Mavs fan, do you guys think that the Timberwolves have enough firepower to compete with Dallas? We obviously talked about this a lot, but there is a question about, look, they're both defensive teams. Even Dallas, more than you think, they're a defensive team, but they obviously have high scoring. I do think that one big question you should have for the Timberwolves is, can they score a lot? I mean, they won that game with 98 points. If they need to score 110, 115 to win a game, it is worth asking if they have that in them, because I'm not sure they do.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a very fair point. And if you got two great defensive teams going at it and one team's got Luka and Kyrie, right? And then they've got Anthony Edwards. And I know Karl-Anthony Towns is a really good offensive player. I don't think he's in the category of a Kyrie or Luka if they get rolling. That's a fair question. If you get into a tight game and they've just got a little bit more star power in terms of their offense creators, I think that's a fair question. I think Minnesota all along has been like, we have enough. We have enough because our defense will make up the difference. And they've been right to this point.
All righty, hit that outro music, Emma. Legs, what a good show, man. I kept you a little bit longer today, but this was a huge weekend, man. There was plenty to talk about.
Man. For sure. No games tonight, but I can't wait to get back on with you tomorrow.
Tomorrow, we're going to be breaking down the Eastern Conference. So everything we did today, we'll do it tomorrow for the Pacers and the Celtics. Do the Pacers have a puncher chance? Is that last game, Game 7, indicative of where their offense is right now? We'll break all of that down and more. And plus, can anybody stop TJ McConnell? That'll be tomorrow's show. Everybody, thanks for hanging out with us. Hit that like button on the way out. We'll see you then.
We all silly like the mayor.